We are again in the book of Judges in chapter 12, finishing up the story of Jephthah, as well as it's going to just be a quick mention of three other judges, Ibzan, Elon, and Abdon. Now, this passage I originally had titled The Downward Trend of the Judges, and just kind of referring to how things really start to look bad for the judges, and it leads into Samson. And you will not see the word judge after Samson's story is over at the end of Judges chapter 16. So all the way from end of 16 to 21, you will never hear a mention of judge again. And that just tells you that there's something going on with the judges that isn't good. And I would argue there's sort of a trajectory that gets set up. Really, though, there's a pattern. The pattern of Judges is not just Israel sins, they become oppressed by these other nations. God raises up a judge who fights their battles, who brings victory, who brings prosperity, and then in their prosperity, the Israelites get complacent and lazy and comfortable, and they fall back into sin, and cycles over and over again. We see also a pattern in the lives of many of these judges as well, that these saviors of the Israelites were oftentimes sinful as well, or at least not perfect men. And at best, even if they're very good judges, they would die, and then the cycle would repeat where the people just could not remain good unless there was someone literally watching over them the whole time. And of course, that's a pattern we're going to see all throughout Kings, and it's a pattern even of humanity. So kind of a funny joke if you're familiar with The Lord of the Rings. And the joke was basically, I hate the idea of a monarchy except for when I'm watching Lord of the Rings. And then it's like, Aragorn, I'll give you my sword, I'll give you my life, I'll follow you anywhere. And the kind of joke or the idea being, when there's a truly noble king and a good king who is willing to sacrifice himself for the people, you'll follow him anywhere. Whereas typically when you look at the real world and you see real kings and real presidents and real politicians and prime ministers, so often they fall short. You would not lay down your life for them. And yet, fictional characters kind of point to a reality. Well, if there was such a good king who would be willing to die for you, you'd be willing to die for him, so to speak. And that's kind of what we talked about. I mentioned this morning, but in Luke, Steve Swanson talking about the cost of discipleship. Like, Jesus is the king who lays down his life for you, but he also tells you, count the cost of discipleship. Like, if you want to follow him, you need to deny yourself, pick up your cross, and follow, which is a way of saying you need to be willing to sacrifice your life for the one who sacrificed his life for you. Well, why would you do that unless you thought this king was truly worthy? So the book of Judges points us in that direction, as do a lot of the narratives and stories of the Old Testament, is that if there was such a king who was so good, who was forever and ever good, wouldn't you follow him? Wouldn't you want him to be in charge? And I think the answer is yes. So even non-Christians say that. They watch Lord of the Rings. Yeah. I mean, I hate monarchies. I hate colonialism and all this stuff. But except when I watch Lord of the Rings, it's like, I'll follow Aragorn to the ends of the world. That's just that idea. It's in our hearts somewhere. Anyway. We see, though, the contrasts in the Ephraimites in Judges 12, the opposite of that kind of self-sacrificing attitude and that kind of leadership, which is willing to serve and give. Instead, we see pride. We see pride on full display, and whenever you see pride in the Bible, instead of thinking, oh yeah, these narcissists, these arrogant men and women, I'm glad I'm not like them, what you're supposed to do when you read a passage like that is put up a mirror and say, oh, is this happening in my life? Am I just seeing a pattern in humanity that's also reflected in my own heart? Let me double check. So that's a little bit of what we're going to do today as we study the book of Judges chapter 12. Let's begin. We'll get a few verses in, and then we'll talk about it and so on. But we're going to end up doing a brief history of Ephraim. Judges chapter 12, verse 1. The men of Ephraim were called to arms. And this is after Jephthah defeated the Ammonites, after Jephthah presumably sacrificed his own daughter because of his vow that he had made. The men of Ephraim were called to arms, and they crossed to Zaphon and said to Jephthah, "Why did you cross over to fight against the Ammonites and did not call us to go with you? We will burn your house over you with fire." First, a brief history of Ephraim. Who are they? Where did they come from? Well, the Ephraimites are descendants of one of the two sons of Joseph, right? Way back in Exodus, remember, or before Exodus, so before Moses and all that, remember that the Israelites, Abraham and his descendants, the 12 sons of Jacob, they all ended up in Egypt. And Joseph, who's the one that was second in charge of Egypt, by the hand of God, he had two sons, and he asked that his sons would basically receive his part of the inheritance. So Ephraim and Manasseh. And they too come into the land, the promised land, and they take up their lot, their inheritance in the land, just as the other tribes did. And Ephraim was sort of in the center of the promised land. And if you remember Manasseh, half of them stayed on the east side of the Jordan River, and half of them stayed on the west side of the Jordan River. Okay, so you got a map in the back or map in your Bible. The Jordan River goes, north-south, and so you have between the Jordan and between the Mediterranean Sea, right kind of in the middle, Ephraim. And you have Manasseh right next to him, and Manasseh on the other side of the river. This is going to be kind of important later. Now, Joshua, remember the book of Joshua, which we studied through, this second in charge of Israel after Moses, and then when Moses died, Joshua was the main leader. He was a famous Ephraimite, all right? So he was from the tribe of Ephraim, and the tribe of Ephraim was a very large and powerful tribe. They were militarily especially very powerful. They had many mighty men, so they were warriors. If you remember back in Judges 3, the judge Ehud gathered men from Ephraim to defeat the Moabites, and they're proud soldiers, okay? Now, later on, Ephraim would become the center of the northern kingdom. So this is all happening, between 700 or 9 to 900 BC-ish, okay? Roughly speaking, David is going to be reigning and ruling 1000 BC. Solomon, his son, will reign after him, and then his sons are going to split the promised land, 10 tribes in the north, 2 tribes in the south, and they'll be called the tribe of Israel, or the kingdom of Israel and the kingdom of Judah. The northern kingdom of Israel, the southern kingdom of Judah. At the center of the northern kingdom, Israel, which is sometimes called the kingdom of Ephraim, is Ephraim in the middle of it, with Samaria, which is in Ephraim, the capital of the northern kingdom. So Ephraim becomes very important later because they kind of represent this rebellious northern kingdom that split away from the southern kingdom, started almost a whole nother religion. Okay? And there is maybe some idea here or some kind of seed that they're going to cause a civil war between east and west of the Jordan, and later on they're going to cause a conflict north and south. So they're sort of in the center, right in the middle. They cause a lot of trouble, and it's rooted in their pride and their arrogance. So they cause civil wars because of their pride. All right, so that's a theme that's going to come up. So Ephraim, very powerful, second only to Judah. And remember, in the northern kingdom, they never have a good king. So it's not a good sign. Ephraim is not necessarily the apple of God's eye, so to speak. And they're going to be scattered along with all of the northern kingdom by the Assyrians. 720 BC or so, the Assyrians will come in and scatter that whole northern kingdom, drive them out, and they are still to this day, almost 3,000 years later, scattered. These 10 tribes are scattered all over the world. They never come back. So, all that to say, Ephraim, you're not supposed to necessarily look at in a good light when you read this passage. So you see them kind of being hostile and fighting, picking a fight. Well, guess what? That's kind of who they are. So that's a brief history of the Ephraimites. Now we see the pride of the Ephraimites here because they, again, on the Jephthah is on the east side of the Jordan River going north-south. Gilead and Jephthah are here. They fought the Ammonites. You can see on the map on the back too. Ephraim is on the other side of the river, right across. And they are saying, hold on, why didn't you call us to go fight the Ammonites? We're insulted. We're offended that you didn't ask us to fight with you. We're going to burn your house down with you in it. Very extreme. We'll talk about that in a second. Now, it's interesting because they did the same thing. I don't know if you remember or not, but they did the same thing to Gideon in Judges 8. In Judges 8, they also said, well, why didn't you invite us to your fight against the Midianites? And Gideon handles it in a kind of diplomatic way, and in fact gives them a chance to participate in the battle against the Midianites. So they're appeased, and Gideon himself, being from the tribe of Manasseh, which is, they're close, he kind of made them happy, right? Here, that's not what's going to happen. We got to ask us, why does it seem like they miss out on these battles? Hey, why weren't they invited? It's not a party, but why aren't they invited to defend Israel from the enemies there? Why are on the sideline while Israel's being oppressed? But you have to ask yourself, the Ammonites had been oppressing the Israelites for something like 18 years, I think is the right number, but if I'm wrong, you can double check. But for many years, why didn't they rise up at any point during that time? If it really bothered them, why didn't they at any of those times come out? Why do they only finally come out of hiding after the battle is already won? So obviously there's something going on here that isn't quite right, because they had plenty of chances. It's not like you just start a war and you don't know that that's going to happen. Certainly the Ephraimites knew what was happening, but they waited. Now, here's arrogance and pride at work. There's a lot of times when our arrogance makes us feel entitled to certain positions or roles that we did not earn, to deserve something, some reward, without putting in the work. Now, on the one hand, you think of God's grace towards us. Do I earn God's grace? Do I work for God's grace? No. I'm saved not because of any good thing I did, right? And same for all of you. We did not earn our salvation. On the other hand, we are to work hard. Why do we work hard as Christians unto the Lord? Well, it demonstrates that we believe that the joyful duties and jobs that God gives us are a cooperation and participation with God in gospel work, in good, truly good works. So we put in a lot of effort, not necessarily for reward. There are rewards, but we do it happily because God is giving us a chance to participate in the battle, so to speak, and to share in the work that He does. So it's like, a kid asking to help dad, fix something or do some work. And the kid is not necessarily going to get a reward for it, but he just has a joy in doing something important, because everything dad does must be important, right? So for him to participate in it, it fills his heart with joy, even though he's not going to get, paid for it necessarily. And so the reason we work hard is because we believe in the job that we're doing and why it's good. On the other hand, arrogance and pride wants to take credit for things other people have done. And here in the case of Ephraim, to blame others for why we didn't do what we ought to have done, which is really to be content, to let other people do the work we should be doing. Think about that, the arrogance of them saying that after the battle's done, well, why didn't you invite us? We wanted to be a part of this deal, but really they were just sitting on the sidelines. They could have confronted the Ammonites at any time during the oppression if they were so upright. They wanted to seek justice. And frankly, then pride also becomes an excuse for not doing all that they could do. Why didn't they do something? Well, it's pride and arrogance, because they're too comfortable. It didn't affect them. The Ammonites oppressing everyone else around them, not messing with them really, they were okay with it until they missed out on the rewards and the glory. Pride becomes an excuse where you only want to do the big things. the important things, without understanding that true greatness is to be a servant of everyone. It's failing to act when you could and being upset that you didn't. It's just foolishness. One commentator, Gary Inrig, he tells a story of D.L. Moody, famous preacher, being confronted by a man who came up to him and said, "Mr. Moody, I don't like the way you preach the gospel." "You know," Mr. Moody said, "I'm always willing to learn. Tell me about the method you use." "Well, I guess I don't really have one," the man said. "I'll tell you what," Moody responded, "I like the way I do it better than the way you don't do it." Okay? I mean, it's just so funny to criticize when you haven't done anything. And how frustrating that is. But why would you ever do that except your own pride and ego? You missed the boat, so now you're going to make everyone else feel bad that you missed the boat because of your own action. Not only that, you see, their pride causes them to threaten violence. And these aren't idle words. They took their soldiers, they crossed the Jordan River, they came to this city right on the other side of the phone, and they're with their mighty soldiers, thousands, tens of thousands of them, at least 42,000, because that's how many die at the end of it. Tens of thousands of men, they bothered to cross the Jordan with their soldiers, with their swords and shields and chariots and everything, and said, "We're going to burn your family, or your house down with you in it." And really, this is a threat against not just his property and his life, but even his family. So they're not messing around here. They're not just hurt. They're threatening with violence that you need to do something to make us happy, to appease us, because we're upset about this, and now we've got a big army, and you need to do something about it. And you have to imagine here that Jephthah has, at this point, again, we talked about this last week, either he has already sacrificed his daughter or he's going to, right? And again, if we take kind of the view we did last week, to burn his own daughter as a sacrifice, and then have these guys come in and say, "We're going to burn everything else too." I mean, this is not an idle threat. It's actually just, kind of digging the knife in a little further. When you can't be defended by your character and conviction, you must enforce with violence your position. I'm going to force you to respect me. That's what's happening here. That's what pride does so often. I'm going to use force until you respect me. But if you have to use force to gain people's respect, that's not respect at all. It's a tale as old as time, though. Right? That's our hearts. That's our human nature. Especially, you might say especially for men, but it's not like women don't do that as well. But you just imagine like a man trying to demand his wife respect him by making threats to her or being violent with her. But this is human nature. This is pride. Remember the rivalry between Cain and Abel. Genesis 4, Cain's jealousy and ego could not stand his brother's righteous heart. And so the language of pride and entitlement and desire so often is the language of violence. James 4, 1 and 2. Very familiar words and warnings. James 4, 1 and 2. What causes quarrels and what causes fights among you? Is it not this, that your passions are at war within you? You desire and do not have, so you murder. You covet and cannot obtain, so you fight and quarrel. You do not have because you do not ask. You ask and do not receive because you ask wrongly to spend it on your passions. See, here's a rebuke that even adults do this. We're no better than children so often. Children, they fight, they quarrel, right? And they want what they want. They take a toy from someone's hand and make them cry. They hit them over the head to get what they want. That's what kids do. Well, you know what? Adults do that too, but in a more sophisticated way. They don't do it with their fists, they do it with armies, right? They're more manipulative. They politic and they lie and they deceive to get what they want. But it's just kids. It's just human nature. It's just sin to do this. And it's our pride ultimately that says, you have what I want, so I should take it. I should be happy, not you. I know that's making you happy right now, but it will make me a little bit happier. Well, I don't need to make any more application. You're probably, in your own heart, that's the way we think sometimes. Well, that's what's on display here with Ephraim, and their threat of violence is just the lowest of low. That's the most base way for a person to show their pride and ego, is to make threats of violence. So, what happens next? Well, their pride is corrected and confronted. Jephthah said to them, I and my people had a great dispute with the Ammonites, and when I called you, you did not save me from their hand. And when I saw that you would not save me, I took my life in my hand and crossed over against the Ammonites, and Yahweh gave them into my hand. Why then have you come up to me this day to fight against me? Then Jephthah gathered all the men of Gilead and fought with Ephraim. And the men of Gilead struck Ephraim because they said, You are fugitives of Ephraim, you Gileadites, in the midst of Ephraim and Manasseh. And the Gileadites captured the fords of the Jordan against the Ephraimites. And when any of the fugitives of Ephraim said, Let me go over, the men of Gilead said to him, Are you an Ephraimite? When he said, No, they said to him, Then say Shibboleth. And he said, Sibboleth, for he could not pronounce it right. Then they seized him and slaughtered him at the fords of the Jordan. At that time, 42,000 of the Ephraimites fell. Jephthah did not mince words, and he deals very decisively with the Ephraimites, firstly correcting them, then confronting them. Because after all, he says he did help. Remember when Jephthah was talking to the king of the Ammonites, he didn't immediately fight with them. He said, why do we have a beef here? What's going on? And the Ammonites made a claim about how you came into the land and, you owe us this and that. And if you remember, Jephthah gave him a history lesson. So Jephthah, I think, is a godly man. I mean, despite kind of what happened at the end of the chapter last week, that he's trying to do what he can to make sure he does things in an upright way. In this case, he's correcting them. Your pride is causing you to lie, because we in fact did ask for help, but you rejected us. You withheld it. And so he didn't let their rejection keep him from acting faithfully. Well, then I guess God wants me to fight this on my own. And God did win the victory. And God apparently wanted those brash Ephraimites out of the battle, maybe to demonstrate specifically that he was the one who won it, and not give the Ephraimites a room to boast, to say, you couldn't have done this without us, Jephthah, so you owe us a lot. Well, maybe it's exactly God's purpose that he did not let them be a part of the fight, so it would be very clear that the Ammonites were defeated by Yahweh. And Jephthah, again, he's always very God-conscious. He calls God to be the one that wins the battle. If God does this, he's very deferential. God, this has to be a God thing. It can't be a me thing. So he rightly attributes the victory to Yahweh, and the Ephraimites are not happy. Think about this kind of pride as well. Something good has happened to his brothers. Why can't Ephraim just be happy that the Ammonites are gone and that his brothers, right? These are his brothers, are victorious and free of oppression? Why can't he be happy for them? God is glorified. His brothers are victorious. Why aren't you happy? The outcome was so good. But you see, their heart, pride, ego, if their true heart's desire was to see God honored and the people saved, there should have been no conflict here. But in their ego, in their rivalry, in their pride, it kept them from rejoicing, because they would almost rather God be defeated than to win a victory without them. What a dangerous place to be, to think, well, if I can't be a part of it, I hope everything you do fails. Now, there's a lot to say about that kind of rivalry in the church. Even Paul, he faced that. He spoke of those in Philippians 1:15, of those who preach the gospel from envy and rivalry. That sometimes we'd rather see the church burn down before giving up on our wounded pride, or admitting we're wrong, or not getting to do what we want. It's such a destructive attitude to say, well, if I can't be happy, no one can be happy. Again, it's childish, but that's just pride. And you probably know plenty of adults who think the same way. Or maybe there's one looking at you in the mirror. Or if I can't be happy, no one can be happy. No one should be happy. But the true heart of humility is to be happy, to rejoice when others are rejoicing, to be happy to do great things and small things. Or, as D.L. Moody, another great D.L. Moody quote, there are many of us that are willing to do great things for the Lord, but few of us are willing to do little things. Why couldn't Ephraim just be happy to you guys kind of wiped out the Ammonites, but if there's any dusting or sweeping to do after the battle, we'd be happy to do it. If there's anything left, we'd be happy to do it because it's about the work of the Lord. And whether we're a doorman in the house of the Lord or the priest, just to be equally happy to serve God together. But no, they're too proud. If I can't be happy, no one can be happy. And predictably, when a proud person is called out on their twistings of the truth and accusations, the Ephraimites responded with name-calling and call the Gileadites fugitives or refugees. The word has a wide range of meanings, and it means something like a survivor or someone trying to flee from danger, like a refugee. So either they're calling the Gileadites cowards, right? Which doesn't make, it wouldn't make sense to call them cowards because they fought the Ammonites. But it's just a way of saying, well, you're a jerk, Well, you are the one who are the cowards, not us, even though we weren't part of the battle, again, like children. Or they're saying that these Gileadites, this land is ours anyway, and we're letting you squat here. But we, the Ephraimites and the Manasseites, we should have kicked you out long ago. You're just squatting here. Who are you guys? You shouldn't be here. Either way, they are disparaging. They're saying insulting things. They're calling names to the Gileadites. Now, ironically, the same word there in fugitive is used to refer to the Ephraimites in verse 5. So verse 4, you are fugitives, you Gileadites. Verse 5, the Ephraimites are fugitives. They're fleeing from danger because they're getting wiped out by the Gileadites. Gilead, of course, is the key winner here. There's irony because in Judges 3:28, when Ephraim was fighting the Moabites, they captured the fords of the Jordan River, and they kept the Moabites from crossing over. So this is just a battle thing. You capture the fords of the river. Now they cannot access because you're defending this ford, and in order to pass through, it's very difficult to pass through without going across these fords, and you're going to get wiped out. So ironically, now Gilead has captured these fords from the Ephraimites, and now they are suffering the same kind of defeat as the Moabites. And usually this kind of irony, where the tables get turned on you, when you see that in the Bible, it's usually a way of showing that God providentially is against you. When the same thing you did comes back on you, when the same blessing that you experienced, now someone is experiencing and not you, that kind of irony usually means that you messed up. You did something bad. And here, it's clear. Ephraim is in the wrong here. It doesn't mean that Jephthah isn't, and we'll get to that in a second, but that Ephraim definitely is not the one that has God on their side because the tables have turned on them. And you might be wondering about this Sibboleth and Shibboleth thing. But if you are, let's put it this way, some dialects, even of Spanish, they have an S sound, but not SH, like this. So the difference between Sibboleth and Shibboleth, which is why that sometimes some Spanish speakers, instead of saying like shoot, would say choot, or shower, they say chower, because they don't have an SH sound. So they will say ch. And so it's like this. So, say shower, and they say chower. They're not a native English speaker. It's the same kind of thing that's happening here. Or in Korean, there's no F sound. So my dad would constantly be practicing saying the word film, because in Korean, there's no F sound, and there's no L and M sound close together in Korean. So it's very hard. So Koreans would say like pilum. So he'd constantly practice film, pilma, like you're just very difficult. So it's that kind of linguistic thing. It's kind of ironic that in English we call it Spanish, but Spanish people cannot say the word Spanish. And they call Spanish, Espanol, right? So they also they cannot start words with the letter S. So there's no words, in Spanish, very, 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 I don't think any at all. They have to have an E in front of it, like Español or España. You say Spain. So the word Spanish-speaking people cannot say. kind of messing them up here. Except I think our Argentinian dialect, they have the sh sound, but they use it in very unique, in a unique context. So that's like one dialect of Spanish does have an SH, or a few, but for the most part, they cannot say it. So this should sort of work. Like, are you a native English speaker? Say shibboleth, and the Spanish speaker might say esibboleth, right? Or a sibboleth. I don't know if they have oh no, they do have a TH sound. Anyway, so that might seem to you weird to you if you're a native English speaker, but if you know another language, you probably understand kind of what's happening here is that there's some words they cannot say properly, right? That as a native speaker, you say, yep, you're not from around here. And this is being used as a method to distinguish these Ephraimite soldiers and slaughter them. Now you might say, so some people view this sort of negatively, that Ephraim is basically wiping out all of these soldiers who are trying to run away from the battle. So is this right or wrong for Ephraim to do this? Now, there's a little bit of debate, like a lot of the passages in Judges that we've talked about, because this seems particularly harsh, right? Because these are their brothers. These are not like the Ammonites or the Philistines or something, and the Moabites. These are their brothers that they're slaughtering. It's civil war, and they're trying to run away. So why are you trying to kill, let's say, all of them? Well, it's one of those situations where the narrator of the story doesn't say good or bad, one way or the other. It's probably best to look at this in the context of this is a war, and war is brutal. And you don't necessarily stop a war or stop fighting just because you're winning. So just because you're winning doesn't mean you stop fighting. In this case, Jephthah thought that the threat from the Ephraimites, both because of their military power and the fact that they're going directly against him, was enough to keep fighting. So in the context of war, there's nothing here that's unusual in the context of war. Just to us, it feels like, oh, why isn't he being more gracious? Why isn't he being more merciful to his enemies? Well, there's not necessarily any mandate to. And again, they had bothered to take thousands, tens of thousands of soldiers, cross this river with all of their supplies, and threaten to burn your house down with you and everyone you love in it. And this after God clearly demonstrated that he is on Jephthah's side. That Jephthah is God's man who saved the Israelites and is his appointed savior and judge. So Ephraim wasn't just declaring war on Jephthah. Ephraim was declaring war on God himself. And so in that sense, they needed to be disciplined. They needed to be destroyed in battle. So the text here with Jephthah ends with Jephthah judged Israel 6 years. Then Jephthah the Gileadite died and was buried in his city in Gilead. He has a relatively short rule. So will the 3 men that come after him. Relatively short judgeship. Now going back to the issue of pride. How does God address pride? Well, he addresses it the way Jephthah did. James 4:6. And this is sort of right after the passage we read about what causes, divisions and wars amongst you is you desire and don't have, and basically your pride. And how does he kind of end this section? He says, therefore it says, James 4:6, God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. How does God address the proud? He is opposed to it. He puts his face against it. C.S. Lewis says, a proud man is always looking down on things and people, and of course, as long as you're looking down, you don't see something that's above you. In other words, a proud person cannot see God. cannot acknowledge God. You cannot be proud and also be a friend of God because you're so busy looking down on other people that you can't look up. You think you're on the top of the heap, so everyone's below you. You never even bother to think God is up there above you, greater than you, judging you. You're sitting there judging everybody else. And so God also, like Jephthah, does not mince words, does not really give a place for pride. God opposes the proud. Think of that. He's against you if you're a proud person. And I think that's something, again, always remember to put a mirror in front of our hearts. No one ever says, or rarely do we ever say, man, I am so proud and arrogant. We don't typically say that. And no one really is ever going to come up to you. I mean, how many times in your life has anyone explicitly come up to you and said, you're just very arrogant and proud? Maybe you've had people do that. And you know what? Bless the person who is willing to say that to your face, because it's probably true. But most of the time, we don't do that. And frankly, our pride is not usually revealed in such an obvious way. Instead, it's in these subtle ways, like being entitled, like wanting a reward when you haven't done anything, like feeling like, no, if I'm not happy, no one else can be happy, like using threats and violence to get your way, like trying to tell a lie in order to manipulate someone into giving something to you. Why didn't you call us over? Well, Jephthah did, right? Those are the ways that we show our pride. It's really not ever just, I'm better than you. I'm just so much superior than you. It doesn't happen that way. It's in these subtle ways that our pride appears.
I'm very proud of my humility.
Yeah. That's right. I've got to be the most humble person in this room right now, right? Like something like that. It's very subtle sometimes, the attitude we can have. God opposes that kind of pride. Just think about it. He's opposed to that. He contradicts that. He is not ever going to think well of a proud person. He opposes the proud. But if you want his grace, what do? Humble yourself. He opposes the proud, gives grace to the humble. Now these next three judges, I'll read the text real fast, but you'll see sort of a pattern here. After him, Ibzan of Bethlehem judged Israel. He had 30 sons and 30 daughters. He gave in marriage outside his clan, and 30 daughters he brought in from the outside for his sons. And he judged Israel 7 years. Then Ibzan died and was buried at Bethlehem. After him, Elon the Zebulunite judged Israel. Zebulun's another tribe. And he judged Israel 10 years. Then Elon the Zebulunite died and was buried at Aijalon in the land of Zebulun. After him, Abdon, the son of Hillel, the Pirathonite, judged Israel. He had 40 sons and 30 grandsons who rode on 70 donkeys, and he judged Israel 8 years. Then Abdon, the son of Hillel, the Pirathonite, died and was buried at Pirathon in the land of Ephraim, in the hill country of the Amalekites. Now, almost certainly, Ibzan and Abdon, they had many wives or concubines, just like, remember, Gideon. And remember how much trouble Gideon's sons, his many sons, gave, where Abimelech murdered the 70 sons that he had. It's never good. Polygamy, multiple wives, multiple concubines, never good. There's no way you get to 60 sons and daughters without a lot of wives, right? Like one woman was not producing that many. So for sure. So we again have these very flawed judges, just like Gideon. We also have an indication that under their judgeship, though, there was prosperity. And that's what these donkeys and the grandsons, those are signs of prosperity. So we have this mix again of good and bad. Prosperous times, God used these judges, but at the same time, they had multiple wives and all these kids, and that did not turn out very well for Gideon. And it might be the case that their kind of short season of being a judge has to do with them not being so great or overly qualified. Now, there's a lot of reading between the lines there. You can't go too far with it, so a lot of commentators, there's not a whole lot to say there. And of course, the text doesn't spend like a lot of time talking about anything they accomplished, other than that they were God's men, flawed men that he used to judge. And as we've talked about before, just that thank God that he uses flawed people for his work, because I'm a flawed person too. On the other hand, we see that there are limitations. We see the problems that flawed men bring along with them, like Gideon, and as we'll see, like Samson, because this is leading up to the quintessential flawed judge, Samson, which we'll start to get into, and he gets a lot of time written about him, or a lot of words written about him. And again, as I said at the beginning, the word judge is used in reference to him there at the end of his life, in chapter 16, verse 31, and then you do not see the word judge again in the whole rest of the book of Judges. And we'll see what that means and what that leads up to, Lord willing, when we get there. But the book of Judges ends with another civil war with the Benjaminites. So we already see here this downward trend of the judges. But the mirror is up. We need to recognize that when we read of these judges, when we read of anyone in the Bible except for Christ, we just see fragments and pieces. The good parts we need to recognize and give thanks to God for, and the sinful parts we need to see, okay, is that in my own heart? Let's be thankful that God forgives. We'll close again with one more Dwight L. Moody quote. "I've never met a man who has given me as much trouble as myself." In other words, the heart of humility is to see that the person who's giving me so much grief in my life is me. The anti-heart of pride, and the opposite heart of pride, true humility, recognizes that I'm the one that needs the most work. And if I'm willing to see God and want God to work in my life, then you'll start to see God do amazing things through your life, because God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. If you're not a Christian this evening, I'm praying that there's a little bit of a mirror that was put up here, that maybe God is showing you a little bit of the pride that's in your life, or maybe a lot of the pride that's in your life. And for God to show you that the person most in your life, or the person most messing up your life is you. And the only way to deal with that, because you're you and you can't not be you, is for God himself who made you to fix that, to change that. And he does that through Christ, because Christ not only died to forgive our sins, to kind of wipe your conscience clear, he also takes out that heart that's so deceitful and wicked and wants to pursue sin, and gives us a new heart that wants to pursue holiness and the things of God, that realizes the way up is the way down. If I want to be great in the kingdom, I must be least of all and servant of all. To live in that upside down way, God says you need his Spirit. You need his life in you. And if you're not a Christian today, I'd love to talk to you more about that, especially if you feel burdened by sin. If you're a believer this evening, I hope, again, there's opportunity here to learn from the mistakes of others, to be able to say, I see some of these things in my own life, and to give it to God and ask him to forgive. And the Bible says that if we confess our sins, he's faithful and just to forgive us our sins and cleanse us from all unrighteousness. And not to be found in opposition to God, but rather remembering once again that as a child of God, he has so much grace and forgiveness and love for us. And we can participate with him in his mighty works, even though we are flawed people.